Welcome back, Lexie Hull. Welcome back, Lexie Hull. It's about damn time. It's about damn time. And look, the positive thing with Lexie Hull, even when she was struggling, was that she was getting in the right positions. Like, you could tell she was working her ass off, even when it wasn't working.
That is the version of Lexie Hull Indiana has been waiting to see again. Not perfection, not a superstar transformation, just impact. And if this really is the beginning of another one of her strange hot streaks, the timing could completely change how dangerous the Fever looked down the stretch.
It wasn't working. You could still tell that Lexie Hull was doing everything she could to help her team win. She was working her ass off, and it just wasn't working out. She was the Fever's leading scorer early in this game. She was getting offensive rebounds. Like, I get it, this was a good shooting game. And if you know anything about Lexie Hull, she just needs a spark. Like,
and that distinction matters. Even while the results disappeared, the effort didn't. Hull was still getting herself into useful positions, still attacking the glass, still trying to create extra possessions. The problem was that effort without production eventually becomes very difficult to defend, especially for a player whose role depends on turning those opportunities into something tangible. But now she finally got the spark, and the interesting question isn't whether this one game was good. We can see that it was. The question is whether this is one random night or the beginning of something Hull has done before, because her history suggests there may not be much middle ground.
Talks about like streaky shooters. There's nobody quite like Lexie Hull, because she goes on 15 game cold streaks and 10 game hot streaks. I've never seen anything like it before with Lexie Hull. I have never in my life seen a player like Lexie Hull in the way she plays, because she goes from nuclear hot to ice cold in a flash. And
that is what makes Hull such a bizarre player to evaluate. Most streaky shooters fluctuate game to game. Maybe they shoot well Tuesday, struggle Thursday, recover over the weekend. Hull's swings can feel much longer than that. When the shot disappears, it can disappear for an entire stretch. But when she finds it, suddenly one good performance can become several, and that's why this game matters more than the box score by itself. Indiana doesn't need to pretend all of the problems from the cold stretch disappeared overnight. They didn't. But if Hull's confidence is returning now, Indiana could be getting a useful rotation piece back at exactly the point of the season when one extra dependable player can dramatically change a playoff matchup. And later, there's another part of this that becomes even more important. What Indiana actually needs from Hull is far smaller than what people were expecting after her contract situation became part of the conversation. That lowered standard might actually be the key.
Then she goes nuclear hot, and then she'll go ice cold for 10 games, and then she'll go nuclear hot for 15 games. Like, if you've ever looked at Lexie's career, she doesn't have like outlier good games. She goes and has great spells of games. And I also have to give credit to Lexie Hull for what was, for the first time in a long time, a good...
Notice the wording there. Great spells of games. That's the gamble Indiana is making now. They don't need to know what Hull looks like 6 months from now. They need to know what she looks like over the next stretch. And offensively, this wasn't just somebody standing in the corner waiting for a shot. She was active early. She was crashing for offensive rebounds. She was finding ways to contribute before the game had completely settled. For a team with bigger offensive weapons, that's exactly where Hull can become valuable. She doesn't need possessions designed around her. She needs to punish the possessions where the defense decides she isn't the priority. If defenders shade toward Indiana's primary creators and Hull is left with space, that open shot has to become a legitimate consequence. If somebody forgets to box her out, she has to make that mistake hurt. Those are role player possessions, but in close games, role player possessions decide outcomes. The shooting will get the attention. The next piece, though, is where the conversation gets more complicated.
I also have to give credit to Lexie Hull for what was, for the first time in a long time, a good defensive game. Like, Lexie has been very poor defensively. But even like this season as well, if you look, she had streak of 9-9-16-9. and then didn't have 9 points, and then only had more than 9 points once over the next 12 games. And then she went 10, 14, 10.
Because the defensive part cannot just be ignored. Hull has built much of her value around the idea that even when she isn't scoring, she can still make herself useful through energy, length, pressure, and defensive work. So when that side of her game slips at the same time as the offense, there isn't much left to stabilize her minutes. That's why this performance felt different. A made three is obvious, everybody sees it. A player staying attached defensively, contesting without giving away an easy lane, fighting through an action, or simply forcing an opponent to work harder doesn't create the same highlight, but those possessions determine whether a coach can leave a role player on the floor. And look at the scoring pattern that was just laid out. 9, 9, 16, 9. Then the production drops. Later it's 10, 14, 10, followed by 0, 2, and 2. That's not a normal smooth progression. It's almost like you're watching completely different stretches of the same player's season. The encouraging part for Indiana is that another upward swing may have started.
Her next games were 0, 2, 2. And then she's had a 14-point game. She was poor against Liberty, but she had a 9-point game against Dallas. And again, look, she is shooting 50% from over 50% from three. Sorry, no, exactly 50% from three over her last 3 games. She just didn't get any shots because Sophie Cunningham had played most of her minutes against New York. So, look, Lexie's contract is an issue for the offseason. It is. What are they going to do with it?
Now we get to a number that deserves attention. 50% from 3 over the last 3 games at that point, despite limited attempts. That doesn't mean anybody should suddenly project Hull as a 50% 3-point shooter. That would be ridiculous. Small samples can distort everything. What it does mean is that the recent conversation can't simply be, Lexie can't shoot. If you're making half of your threes across a short stretch but aren't receiving many opportunities, the evaluation becomes more nuanced. Are you getting yourself open? Are teammates finding you? Are you willing to shoot immediately when the ball arrives? And can you turn that small stretch into enough confidence that the next open attempt feels automatic instead of stressful? For Hull, confidence appears especially important because the difference between decisive Lexie and hesitant Lexie is enormous. When she catches and immediately knows what she's doing, the entire possession looks cleaner. When she starts thinking about the shot, the closeout, the drive, and the mistake all at once, her effectiveness can collapse. And yes, the contract hangs over this entire discussion, but treating every game as a referendum on that contract misses what Indiana actually needs right now.
Look, Lexie's contract is an issue for the offseason. It is. What are they going to do with it? Are they going to move on from Lexie? How are they going to figure this out? But like, that's a problem for the offseason. That's not a problem for today. That's not a problem for tomorrow. It's not a problem for then. That being said, again, for now, all you have to do...
That's the correct separation. The offseason question is real. Indiana will eventually have to decide exactly what Hull's place is going forward and whether the production matches the investment. Those conversations aren't going anywhere, but that's future Indiana's problem. Current Indiana has games to win, and this is where fans sometimes mix two completely different arguments together. A player can have a contract you dislike and still be useful. A player can fall short of expectations and still help you win a playoff game. Those statements aren't contradictory. If Hull's role for the rest of this season is 20 energetic minutes, defending, rebounding, cutting, and hitting enough open shots to stop teams from ignoring her, Indiana should take that immediately. The Fever don't need her to retroactively justify every expectation attached to her. They need her to perform the job in front of her. That sounds like a small difference, but it's huge psychologically. Instead of asking Hull to prove something every night, simplify everything. Defend your matchup, run the floor, crash the glass, shoot when you're open. Don't turn a simple role into an impossible one. And the reason this could become particularly valuable is that Indiana doesn't necessarily need every supporting wing to get hot simultaneously.
With Lexie is just hope that she plays the rest of the season and she gets in a hot streak at the right time. Because if she gets in a hot streak right before the playoffs, and people saying talking about the FIBA break, Lexie tends to start season as well, and she was great after the Olympic break. If we get 7 point per game Lexie Hull, that's a positive on defense. Like, that's all you need. Like, you need Lexie Hull's contract is a terrible contract. But if
7 points a game and positive defense. Listen to how modest that target actually is. That's not asking for 20. It's not asking Hull to suddenly create offense off the dribble. It's not asking her to become the player who takes the final shot with the defense loaded toward her. It's asking for functional production, and this is where the perception around Hull may have become distorted. Once expectations increase, every ordinary game starts feeling disappointing. People stop evaluating whether a player is helping and start evaluating whether she's living up to the version of her they imagined. But playoff basketball doesn't care about imagined ceilings. If Hull gives Indiana 7 points, makes an open 3, steals an extra possession on the offensive glass, and makes an opposing scorer uncomfortable for several minutes, that's useful, especially if those contributions come without needing the ball. Indiana has players who need touches. Hull's best possible role beside them is almost the opposite. Her value should come from what she does between those touches. That also explains why returning to something closer to her previous role player identity could be more important than chasing a breakout that may never arrive.
If she at least plays up to the really good role player bill, which is what like people have said with Lexie Hull, all people want is for Lexie Hull to be a good role player. Like, at this stage, yes, obviously, I think there were a lot of people that were kind of hoping Lexie Hull would take a step up after the contract. Not happening. Absolutely not happening.
And there's the uncomfortable admission. People expected a step forward. Based on what we've seen, that major leap hasn't happened. But accepting that doesn't mean giving up on the player. It means changing the question. Stop asking, can Lexie Hull become dramatically more than she has been? Ask, can Lexie Hull become reliable at the things Indiana already knows she can do? Those are completely different standards. The first one creates disappointment every time she doesn't look like an upgraded offensive option. The second gives Indiana a realistic pathway to extracting value from her right now, and reliability matters more as the season gets tighter. Playoff rotations shrink, opponents identify weaknesses faster, coaches hunt mismatches repeatedly. If you put a player on the floor who refuses an open 3, opponents notice. If you put a player out there who can be attacked every possession, they notice that too. Hull doesn't need to remove every weakness from her game. She needs to make sure the total package stays on the positive side. That is where the deeper payoff to this whole conversation starts to emerge. Her comeback doesn't require a statistical explosion, it requires trust.
In any way. But at the same time, we just need to get 2025 Lexie back. We just need to get 2024 Lexie back. Because she doesn't have to, in crunch time, guard. She just needs to be a pest on defense. She just needs to be a pest. She doesn't need to guard anybody. Caitlin Clark can do that late in games. She can go and guard late in games. Make layups, shoot 35% from open threes, and crash the board and get a couple of offensive boards a game. And a couple of times, like at least once a game, she goes for an offensive rebound and crashes so hard the opposing player hits the ball out of bounds.
That's the blueprint. Be a pest. Guard whoever needs guarding for stretches. Make the easy layup. Hit roughly enough open threes that leaving you alone becomes uncomfortable. Attack the offensive glass with the kind of commitment that can create a possession, even when you don't personally secure the rebound. That last part is easy to underestimate. An offensive rebound isn't only valuable when the player grabbing it ends up with a statistic. Sometimes crashing hard forces a defender to tip the ball out. Sometimes it prevents an immediate transition opportunity. Sometimes it creates chaos that allows Indiana to reset. Those are winning possessions that barely register in a basic scoring discussion. And this is why evaluating Hull exclusively through points is a mistake. Her offense matters because Indiana can't afford to play 4-on-5, but her pathway to becoming valuable doesn't require her to become an offensive centerpiece. The real version Indiana needs is a connector. She should make the lineup work better without demanding that the lineup work for her. That is an incredibly useful archetype beside high usage talent. Every contender needs somebody willing to do the work that doesn't come with 10 designed shots. The danger is that those players can become almost unplayable when they stop converting the limited opportunities they do receive. If the defense can ignore you and you're not creating enough value elsewhere, the floor gets cramped for everybody. That's why a small shooting resurgence has an effect far beyond Hull's individual scoring average. One made open three changes the next defensive decision, two can change the coverage, and once the defense has to respect the possibility, the Stars have more room. Now add the other wing into this equation, because that's where Indiana's rotation becomes much more interesting.
Times a game, and just be positive. Like, all the Fever need is for, on any given game, one of Lexie and Sophie to play well. One of Lexie or Sophie to play well. They don't need both of them to play well. You just need one of them. And that's all we are looking for. But yesterday, thank God Lexie Hull stepped up, because she had been all over the place. Like, it was bad. It was really bad.
One of Lexie or Sophie. That might be the most practical way to understand Indiana's supporting cast. They don't necessarily need both players to deliver big scoring nights together. Obviously, they'd love that. But if one provides a legitimate offensive contribution on a given night while the other handles a smaller assignment, Indiana's rotation becomes much easier to manage. Think about what that does strategically. If Sophie is scoring, Hull can lean harder into defense, rebounding, and movement. If Hull has the hot hand, Indiana isn't forced to squeeze offense out of somebody else just because that's how the rotation looked the previous game. It gives the coaching staff options. And options become extremely important in a playoff series because the same lineup doesn't always solve every opponent. One matchup might require more size, another might demand better perimeter defense, another might turn into a shooting contest. A role player who can give you different kinds of useful minutes becomes far more valuable than her season scoring average suggests. That's why Hull rediscovering anything close to reliable form matters. It isn't just about Lexie, it's about giving Indiana another button to press.
Lexie Hull stepped up because she had been all over the place. Like, it was bad. It was really bad. And I've said this the whole time. I have been as critical on Lexie as anyone. I have been incredibly critical of Lexie Hull. And I think it's been, justified in a lot of ways. I think the criticism has been justified. I don't think that I've been overly hard.
And that criticism is important context because this shouldn't become revisionist history after one good performance. Hull had been struggling badly enough that criticism was warranted. You can't spend weeks pointing out poor production and then pretend those games never happened because the next one looked better. But fair criticism has another side. When the player responds, you acknowledge that too. Otherwise, you're not evaluating basketball anymore. You're defending a position. If the standard is that poor games deserve scrutiny, then strong games deserve credit. And Hull earned it here because she contributed in multiple areas Indiana actually needed. This also tells us something about how quickly narratives can become outdated late in a season. A month ago, a player can look essential. 2 weeks later, fans want her minutes reduced. Then one stretch changes the rotation conversation again. That's professional basketball. And for somebody as streak-dependent as Hull has appeared to be, those swings become even more dramatic. The mistake would be assuming this game proves she's fixed. It doesn't. But assuming the previous cold stretch guarantees she'll stay cold would be just as lazy. The only useful question is whether the underlying things Indiana needs are starting to return at the right moment.
Harsh on Lexie Hull. I think she's been bad. And it's one of those things where it's because Lexie seems like such a good person, it can be hard to criticize her, and it's clearly a confidence issue. The problem is that regardless of why it's happening, it is happening, and I think it wouldn't be justified because I like Lexie Hull to not criticize her game in a similar way as I would to a player that I...
Confidence is probably the most fascinating part of this, because you can see when a player's mind starts getting in the way of her natural game. The body is still moving, the effort is still there, but every decision suddenly feels heavier. A wide open shot stops being an opportunity and starts becoming a test. If you make it, maybe you finally escape the slump. If you miss it, you're thinking about the previous miss, the next substitution, and everybody watching. That can destroy a role player because role players don't always get 15 attempts to shoot themselves back into rhythm. You might get 4, maybe 3, sometimes 2. If your first open 3 doesn't fall, you still have to take the second one with exactly the same conviction. That's difficult when confidence is already fragile, which is why a game like this can matter beyond the points it produced. Hull now has recent evidence that the ball can go in. She has recent evidence that she can positively affect the game defensively. She has something concrete to build on, rather than trying to manufacture confidence out of nothing, and Indiana doesn't need that confidence to turn into a rational heat check basketball. They need it to create decisiveness.
Probably don't like as much as Lexie Hull, but this is all we need. And again, she's not going to shoot 75% from field and 66% from three. Shoot 45%. You know what? With the shots she takes, shoot 50% from the field and 35% from three on wide opens. Wide opens. And just be a positive defender. That's all you have to be. Don't need to be all WNBA, because I think if we're being honest, I think that might be it. Like, I don't think she's out here going to be the all WNBA.
Now we've reached the actual answer. 75% from the field and 66% from three is not the standard. It shouldn't be. That's not sustainable. And setting that as the expectation would immediately recreate the same problem. The realistic target being discussed is dramatically lower, around 50% from the field on the shots she takes, around 35% on open threes, plus positive defense, and even the exact percentages matter less than the principle. Convert enough of the easy opportunities. That's it. If defenses give Hull uncontested looks because they're terrified of Indiana's better offensive options, punish that choice often enough to make them reconsider it. If she gets a clean cut to the basket, finish it. If a rebound is available, compete for it. If she's assigned to pressure somebody defensively, make that player work. The reason this is the real payoff is that Hull's late season importance isn't based on her becoming something new, it's based on becoming dependable at something old. The Fever don't need an all WNBA player out of nowhere. They don't even need an all defensive transformation. They need a solid rotation player who doesn't give the opponent an obvious reason to target her presence on the court. That's a much more achievable goal. And if this hot game really is the beginning of one of those extended Hull streaks, suddenly the timing looks almost perfect, because the value of a hot streak isn't equal throughout a season. Getting hot when games have less consequence is nice. Getting hot when rotations tighten and every possession becomes more valuable can alter a postseason run. That's why the next few games tell us far more than this one did. Not because Hull has to repeat these shooting percentages. She almost certainly won't. What matters is whether the confidence survives when she misses. Can she go 1 for 4 and still defend? Can she miss her first 2 threes and confidently take the third? Can she contribute without scoring? Can she remain useful enough that Indiana doesn't have to redesign the rotation every time the shot disappears? If the answer becomes yes, Indiana has solved a problem that looked much larger during the cold stretch.
Like all defense. We don't need that. We just need a solid defender. We need any production, literally just any production. And even if that production is just working your ass off, then so be it. And so be it. Just catch the ball, make layups. That's all we need. That is all we need at this stage. So yeah, Lexie, hopefully this is the start of
any production. That sounds almost dismissive, but it's actually the clearest way to frame the stakes. Indiana isn't waiting for Hull to rescue the offense. They're asking her not to become a hole in it. There is a massive difference. A championship level supporting player doesn't always have to dominate a game. Sometimes the job is simply to keep the machine functioning while the stars do what they're supposed to do. And Hull has a pathway to doing exactly that. Her effort has rarely been the question. The issue was whether that effort was translating into enough positive possessions to justify the minutes. In this game, it finally did. Now comes the difficult part, sustaining enough of it. Maybe this was one isolated performance, and the shooting cools immediately. That's possible. Her own history gives you every reason to remain cautious, but that same history is exactly why Indiana should be intrigued. Because if Hull really does operate in these unusually long hot and cold waves, you don't need the hot streak to last forever. You need it to arrive at the right time. Imagine entering a postseason matchup where the opponent's scouting report expects Hull to be the player they can help off of, only for her to start knocking down open shots. Now a defender has to hesitate before collapsing. That hesitation creates another driving lane, another passing window. Another fraction of a second for Indiana's primary scorers. Then Hull crashes the offensive glass and steals an extra possession. Then she makes somebody work defensively. None of those plays individually looks like the reason Indiana wins. Collectively, they can absolutely become the difference between surviving a close game and watching the season slip away. And that's what makes this next stretch so fascinating. The contract discussion can wait for the offseason. The long-term ceiling can wait. Whether people expected a bigger leap can wait too. Indiana has a much simpler question right now. Can this version of Lexie Hull become reliable enough to trust when the games matter most? Because if the answer is yes, the Fever don't need her to be a star. They just found another useful piece at exactly the moment they needed one. So which side are you on? Was this just one hot shooting night before another drop-off? Or are we watching the beginning of one of those Lexie Hull streaks that could carry directly into the postseason? Let me know in the comments, and if you're following every twist in this Fever run, like the video and subscribe because the next few games are going to tell us very quickly which version of Lexie Indiana actually has.